Good evening, and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, February 26, 2026. Last Shabbos at ADATH, our guest speaker was Shawn Aster. Shawn lives with his family in Beersheba. He's a professor at Bar-Ilan University, originally from Montreal. And I was deeply moved by what he said. I thought it was brilliant. And he has given me his permission, and I offer my apologies for any mistakes that I make to present it to you tonight in a somewhat expanded form. For any group, nation, group, to win a war, it needs military might, obviously. It needs political will, and it needs support from the home front. Without support from the home front, you cannot win a war. Regardless of the military might, regardless of the political will, it is absolutely essential. Some time ago, it was about a year and a half ago, Rabbi Yosef Rimon visited Montreal and he spoke at TBDJ. Maybe some of you were there, I was there. And he told this story. So this was in November of 2024. So this is just a year after the war started, in the middle of the war. He told the story of an Israeli couple that had been trying to get pregnant for a long time. And meanwhile, the husband was fighting in Gaza. And while he was fighting in Gaza, his wife found out that finally she was pregnant. So she contacted Rabbi Rimon to ask him the following question. May I tell my husband that I'm pregnant? Because, of course, I want to tell him because it's something so major in our lives. But maybe if I tell him, it will distract him. And his fighting ability will be compromised. So the answer he gave was very subtle and very sensitive. It's not our topic. But can you imagine the strength and the heroism of a woman to hold back from telling her husband something like that, if it's necessary, to put the needs of Am Yisrael before her own? Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, must succeed. Even if that means I can't tell my husband this very important information. And there are hundreds, no, thousands of stories like this. The home front in Israel, thank God, is very strong. But we must face the reality that most of the world, especially in Western universities and academics, but much wider than that, much of the world accepts the Hamas narrative and rejects the Israeli narrative. And the difference between them is very significant. Because the strength of the home front is based on the strength of its narrative, the story we tell, who we are, why are we fighting, Why is our cause just? That is our narrative. And Israel has incredible home front strength because its people have a very strong narrative. And the narrative is we were mercilessly attacked by Hamas on October 7th. Over 1,200 people were murdered. Another over 250 people were taken hostage. Many of them were tortured. Many of them were killed. And our narrative says, listen, Hamas, just stop trying to kill us and return our hostages, and then no one in Gaza will be hurt. No shortages, no destruction, nothing will happen. Just do those two things. Stop trying to kill us and return our hostages. And that's a very strong narrative. And so when you have a strong narrative, you then use it to understand every individual event that happens. So when we see on the news that a hospital in Gaza, for example, was attacked by the IDF, we understand Hamas is there. They locate themselves, their terrorists, inside places like hospitals and mosques in order to increase their own civilian casualties. And there is no question in our minds that Hamas is responsible for every single casualty in Gaza. And we mourn them. We don't want to hurt them. Hamas also has a very strong narrative, and it's exactly the opposite. Israel is the aggressor. Israel is committing genocide. Israel wants Gaza for itself and for everyone else to just leave. And they are very strong believers in their narrative. And we need to understand this. Both sides are absolutely certain of the truth and the justice of their narrative. And as I said before, we have to face the reality that in large parts of the world, they have accepted the Hamas narrative and they have rejected the Israeli narrative. And once you have a narrative and you believe it 100%, then you explain everything according to that narrative. And it gives you incredible strength, incredible endurance, incredible resilience. This is what Viktor Frankl meant when he said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." If you believe in your purpose, if you believe you're right, if you have a mission, if you have a narrative, you can survive just about anything. Listen, this is incredible. This was in the news recently. Arbel Yehud is a former hostage. She was held in Gaza. In a different interview, she said that she faced sexual assault on almost a daily basis, along with other widespread abuses. And she said recently in an interview that several times she decided to end her life. She couldn't take it. One of the times, she said to this is Times of Israel interview, One of the times I saw drone footage from Hostage Square. You remember that during the entire time there were hostages being held, every Saturday night there was a mass protest and support of the hostages. And not only on Saturday night, but at other times, Hostage Square was an incredible place. One time I saw drone footage from Hostage Square. I saw people holding signs that I didn't know. And then suddenly I saw signs of people I knew. Meaning the people there were advocating for the release, and they're holding up the sign, the posters with the photos of the prisoners, of the hostages. And she says, I saw a sign for Ariel. That was her partner. So she sees she's in Gaza. She's a hostage, and she's allowed somehow to see on TV. Somehow she sees that what's going on in Tel Aviv, and she sees somebody is holding up the photo of her partner, and then she sees that someone, and she can recognize the person because that person is from her kibbutz, is holding up my photo. And she says, from the moment I saw that, I didn't try to put an end to my life down there. When I saw the drone footage and understood that people who I don't know are fighting for me as if I were their sister or daughter, I have a duty to return to Ariel, her partner, and to my family. And I have a duty to return to all of those who are fighting for me. It's an incredible story, but here's the point I want to make. Her narrative kept her alive. That is, she had a narrative, and it literally saved her life. Now, to win, your narrative must be rock solid. You must be convinced that your narrative is right and just and noble. And once you have a narrative, it's very, very hard to alter it. But it is possible. And this is the miracle of Purim. The Megillah that we read on Purim is the story of a narrative that was accepted by Achashverosh and Haman, and it was widespread in Achashverosh's kingdom. And the Jews of Shushan came to accept their narrative. But then, through the efforts of Mordechai and Esther, and behind the scenes God, a different narrative is achieved. Not only by the Jewish people, this is what's incredible, but by Achashverosh and his kingdom, they came to adopt a different narrative. When the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the first Beis HaMikdash, it was destroyed by Bavel, Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar. There was a Jewish narrative. And the Jewish narrative was told to us by Nevi'im, by our prophets, by Yirmiyahu and Yeshayahu and Yechezkel and Hosea and many others. Listen just to this passage from Yirmiyahu, which is representative of many others. This is, by the way, a prophecy of Yirmiyahu. And remember, Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, prophesies the Churban. He prophesies that Jerusalem will be destroyed, the Beis HaMikdash will be destroyed, and the Jewish people will be exiled. And then he also prophesies this. And by the way, we read this as the Haftorah on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Kol Amar Hashem. This is what God says. Avas olam ahavtich. I want you to know, Jewish people, my love for you is everlasting. Can you imagine that when Yirmiyahu says this, the Jewish people are about to go through the worst catastrophe in their history, the Churban, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? And even before it happens, God says to them, my love for you is everlasting. And God says, Od Evnech, it will be rebuilt. Yes, I know I told you, Yirmiyahu says. I know I told you that God said it's going to be destroyed, but it's going to be rebuilt. Ki yesh yom karu notrim bahar Ephraim, the day will come when the watchmen on the mountain of Ephraim will call out and they will say to the Jews who are dispersed and in exile, Kumu v'nale Tzion. It's time to go back to Zion. El Hashem Elokeinu. To go back to the place of God, our Lord. Mizarei Yisrael yikabsenu. God scattered Israel, yes. V'shamru karoa edro. And God will also tend to his flock like a shepherd tends to his sheep. And here's the part that is very famous. Ka Amar Hashem. This is what God says. Kol barama nishma. A voice from Rama can be heard. Nihi b'chi samrumim. Bitter, bitter tears and crying. Rachel mevakel banel. Rachel, our matriarch Rachel, is crying for her children as they're going into exile because the Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed and the Jews are being exiled to Bavel, to Babylonia. And Rachel, her neshama, her spirit, from Kever Rachel, the burial place of Rachel, she's crying. She's crying for her children. Ki einenu, because they're no longer here. They've been sent to exile. She's crying to them, for them. Ka Amar Hashem. This is what God says. Remember, this is before it happens. Ka Amar Hashem. This is what God says. Mini kolech mi bechi Rachel. Stop crying. Ki yesh schar lepulas echnum Hashem. V'shavu me'eretz oyev. Your children will return. Your children will come back from a land of their oppressors. V'shavu vanim ligvulam. And your children will return to their boundary, to their home, to the land of Israel. Don't cry. Don't cry. The Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed. Jerusalem will be destroyed. The Jewish people will be sent into exile. And you will return. And the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, will be rebuilt. The Churban, the destruction is terrible. No minimizing. But it is temporary. That was our narrative. And we held it strongly. We believed it 100%. And having that narrative gave us strength and resilience. Listen to these words from Tehillim. Famous words. Tehillim, Psalm Kuf Lamed Zayin, 137. Al naros Bavel, Sham yashavnu, gam bachinu b'zachrenu es Sion. By the river of Bavel of Babylon, we sat and we wept, remembering Zion. We were sent into exile, and we were mourning. We were so upset. And we made a promise at that moment, a pledge. If I ever forget you, Jerusalem, It should be that my right hand will forget how to move. Imlo ale es Yushalayim aros simchasi. I promise I will remember Jerusalem in every moment. Remember our desire to go back at every moment, even at the moment of our greatest joy. And having that narrative, it kept up our spirits. It kept us together. We were joined together by hope. We were joined together by trust in God. We weren't defeated. The Jews in Bavel did not feel that they were defeated. There was a temporary setback. There was an aberration that would be corrected with our return to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. And the narrative succeeded. It worked. Until it didn't work anymore. Because after years passed, Jews began to doubt. They began to ask, No, isn't it time? Why aren't we returning? You promised. What happened? And here's the thing, a narrative. If you're 100% certain, it gives you all the strength in the world. But if you're not 100% certain, if you start to have doubts in your narrative, it weakens. And then it crumbles. And then it collapses. Now, before the Megillah starts, Achashverosh and his kingdom had their own narrative. And this is a very important historical backstory to understand before the Megillah starts, before the Purim story. They had a competing narrative, and it was a compelling narrative. And the narrative of Achashverosh was Bavel, Babylonia, destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, destroyed Jerusalem, exiled the Jews to Babylonia, and now it's approximately 100 years later. Just keep this in mind. 100 years has passed. And now Babylonia is now Paras, Persia. And Jews are comfortable here, Achashverosh says in his narrative. And the Beis Hamikdash is over. It's gone, it's finished, it's in the past. The Jews are a permanent part of our society. They're not going back. They don't need to go back. They're not interested in going back. It's not necessary. They don't miss it. That was their narrative. And their narrative was supported by reality. Because just look at what's happening. Whatever the Jews said 100 years ago, nothing has happened. It's 100 years. Nothing's happened. And Jews are here. They're comfortable. They're not complaining so much. Jews always complain, but not complain so much. So it would appear that Achashverosh had a very solid narrative based on reality. But here's what's really incredible and tragic. And that is at the beginning of the Megillah, the beginning of the story of Esther, many Jews came to accept the narrative of Achashverosh. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. The Book of Esther begins, and it was in the days of Achashverosh, who reigned over 127 countries, and his capital was in Shushan. Bishnas Shalosh Malcho, in the 3rd year of his reign, Asa Mishtel L'chol Sarav Avadav, he made a feast for all of his advisors and servants and his officials and his governors and all the important people. He made a feast. Let me ask you a question. Why do we need to know when he did it? Why does the Megillah spend the first several verses telling us when it happened? It's very, very important. The date is very, very important because the date that that Achashverosh made his party was just past the date that the prophets had prophesied that the Jews would go back to Israel. And that date had passed without it happening. Now, I have to make a parenthesis. The problem was that the Jews had counted incorrectly. So they thought, and Achashverosh thought, well, the time is up. So what happened to the promise? In reality, the time was not up because they were counting from the wrong time. They started the wrong time. By the way, this is very similar to the incident of the Egel, the golden calf, right? So they counted 40 days, and Moshe wasn't there, so they went hysterical. But what was the problem? The problem was that they started counting at a different time. According to Moshe's count, he came down at the end of 40 days. According to their count, 40 days already passed, so they were hysterical. Okay, it's kind of like that. Why did he make this party at that specific time? Well, next line. Baharoso es osher kvod malchoso. He wanted to display the riches of his glorious kingdom, ves yakar tiferes gedulaso, and the splendor of his majesty. He made the feast clearly to be able to say, my kingdom is secure. Now, I don't know. I'm not asserting that Achashverosh made it specifically because of the Jewish people. But he was celebrating the stability of his kingdom, which of course was enhanced by the fact that although some of these Jews think they're going back to Israel and they're not going to be part of my empire anymore, it didn't happen. So you might as well give up because our narrative is true. It's over. Forget about it. So that was at least a part of his celebrating the stability and the permanence and the strength of his empire. V'hashkos b'chlei zahav. And at this party, everyone was given golden goblets to drink wine. And the way that we read it is as follows. V'hashkos b'chlei zahav v'kelim mikelim shonim. All of a sudden, the tune changes. You'll notice this on Monday night. And on Tuesday, we read the Megillah. All of a sudden, the tune that we're using for the Megillah changes. And those three words change from the regular tune of the Megillah. You recognize that alternate tune. That's the tune from Eicha. That's the tune that we use on Tisha B'Av when we're mourning the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. V'kelim mikelim shonim. And all kinds of different vessels were being used at this feast. Where were those vessels from? Our sages tell us those were the vessels from the Beis HaMikdash, from the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And what did it mean that Achashverosh was using the holy vessels from the temple, from the Beis HaMikdash, at his party to celebrate the stability of his reign? It meant Beis HaMikdash is over. This is my narrative. Finished. These are not holy anymore. Their time has passed. They're goblets. They're wine glasses, so we're going to use them. Beis Hamikdash is over. Jewish connection to Israel is over. Future of the Jewish people is here with us. Get over it. But here comes the worst part. The Talmud asks, why did the Jews at the time of Purim deserve, what spiritual sin did they commit that deserved that there should be a decree that every single Jewish person should be killed, God forbid? What sin did they commit? Says the Talmud, because Jews of Shushan participated in that meal. They went to the feast. They drank from the cups. Now, I want to make this clear. The next verse is, Vashtiyakadas, Einones, and the drinks that were given, each one could decide what they wanted. Nothing was forced on anybody. Because that's what the king decreed. Al kol rabbeso lasos kirton ish va'ish. Each person could have whatever they wanted. The Jews had kosher wine. It was kosher wine. It was mavushal. It was good. There's nothing non-Jewish about it. That wasn't the problem. But the Gemara says, the Talmud says that the fact that the Jews of Shushan could participate in this meal, in this feast, could use these cups, it meant that the Jews had accepted and adopted the narrative of Achashverosh. We have no future in Israel. There will be no return. There will be no rebuilding. So, we agree. We're here. This is our future. Cups are cups. Wine glasses are wine glasses. What does it matter? And says the Talmud, that led to the decree of Haman to kill all the Jews. Because our own narrative weakened. Once Jews stopped believing 100% in our original narrative of the prophets, that there's no question we're going back, it's just a question of when, it's temporary. And once the narrative weakens, it crumbles. And when your narrative crumbles, then you absorb a different narrative. Because a person needs a narrative. Like we saw from Arbella, a person needs a narrative to live. And if mine doesn't work anymore, I need a new narrative. Even though objectively, the narrative that the Jews came to adopt by attending and participating in this feast of Achashverosh was an existential danger to the future of the Jewish people. Because if we're not going back and we're part of Persian society, and we're not going to have a relationship with God anymore, God forbid, what's the point of doing mitzvahs? Why should we stay distinct? Why should we stay separate? So even though their own narrative meant their own destruction, when your own narrative crumbles, you reach for another one. Even if it is a narrative of your own destruction. That was the sin of eating at this feast. We don't believe in our narrative, our former narrative. So the kelim shonim, the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash, they have no significance. Vashkos b'chlei zahav. V'kelim mikelim shonim. They're wine glasses. And this is perfectly and precisely parallel to what we see today. It started gradually, and then it exploded after October 7th. First the world, and then even Nebuch, today, many Jews. And that narrative goes like this. It's hard for me even just to say the words with my lips. But that narrative, maybe Israel is not right. Maybe Israel wants no Palestinians. Maybe the attacks in Gaza are primarily to hurt Gazan civilians. That's the way this narrative goes. God forbid, of course. Maybe Israel, who we used to think of as the persecuted, outnumbered underdog, has become the colonizer, the oppressor. And this narrative was gradually growing, especially within the West, for years. And then it exploded after October 7th, 2023. At the moment, is the irony, at the moment that we felt that our narrative was strongest. We were attacked on October 7th, murdered, raped, taken hostage, tortured, and killed. And all we want is peace. Again, had Hamas returned the captives and stopped trying to kill us, not a single person in Gaza would have been hurt. There would have been no hunger, no shortages, no destruction. Just stop trying to murder us and give us back the hostages you kidnapped. Our narrative was never stronger than that moment. And I'll tell you this, we're in, where are we? February 2026. I don't know everything in the news. I try to follow the news. I do not know of a single instance where someone in Gaza tried to do anything to help a hostage. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Not a single former hostage has even hinted that someone wanted to help them. Whatever reasons you have, whatever. But out of all of Gaza in 2.5 years, not a single person. And by the way, there was a $1 million reward offered by Israel to anybody that would help. And you could do it without Hamas finding out. How more right can we be? We left Gaza in 2005. As hard as that was domestically for Israel, we left. We just want to live side by side in peace. And Hamas refuses. It could not be clearer to us, especially after October 7th. But among many, especially in the West, and increasingly even among Jews, that narrative is crumbling. And when that crumbles, it must be replaced, even if the replacement is the seal of our total destruction, God forbid. Because, of course, that's the Hamas goal. What did the Jews of Shushan do that deserved that they should all be killed? They didn't eat treif. They didn't violate Shabbos. They adopted the narrative that was their own death. with one exception. Not Mordechai. Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan Abira. There was a man, a Jewish man in Shushan, Ushma Mordechai. And again, listen to the tune. The first verse. Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan Abira, Ushma Mordechai. Ben Yair, Ben Shimi, Ben Kish, Ish Yemini, Asher Hagla Mirushalayim. Im Hagolah Asher Haglasa, Im Yechanya Melech Yehuda, Asher Hagla Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. The tune switches to Eicha, to mourning, to lamentations, because Mordechai was the one who did not change his narrative, who did not adopt the narrative of Achashverosh and some of the Jews at that time that participated in this meal. Mordechai continued to mourn the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and to believe in the promise that it was temporary and they would soon return. Mordechai did not give up on the narrative that the experience of the Jews in Shushan was an aberration in Jewish destiny that would be corrected, not, God forbid, a conclusion of Jewish destiny and connection to Israel and to God. And Mordechai was certain, 100% certain, of his narrative. And then the person who represented this alien narrative that even the Jews of Shushan had come to adopt, and the person who embraced it more than anyone else, is Haman. Achar hadvarim ha'eleh, Gidel hamelech Achashverosh es Haman. Achashverosh raises in stature Haman and places him above all of the other ministers and advisors. And all of the servants of the king would bow down to Haman because they adopted the narrative. Haman's narrative that the Jews are a thing of the past. It's over, finished, it's gone. Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachaveh, but Mordechai did not bow down. One person. He did not adopt this narrative, this alien narrative represented by Haman. He would not bow down to Haman. Vayevakesh Haman lahashmid es kol Yehudim. And then the unfolding of the inevitable of this narrative, Haman came up with a plan that Achashverosh agreed to destroy the entire Jewish people. Mordechai yada as kol asher nasa. Mordechai heard what Haman had suggested and Achashverosh had decreed. And again, listen to the tune. Mordechai yada as kol asher nasa. Vayikra Mordechai as bigadav. Vayilbar sak v'efer. Mordechai knew what was going to happen, and he tore his garments in mourning. Vayetzei b'sol chayir, vayizak, zakah gadola umara. And Mordechai went into the center of the city of Shushan, and he cried a bitter cry. He was not going to adopt the narrative of Haman. He resisted. He was mourning. This is a tragedy. We cannot allow this to happen. We're not giving into this. We're not drinking from the cups. We're not accepting the narrative. No. And that's why, again, the switch from the Esther tune to the Tisha B'Av tune. But it's Esther who comes up with a plan. And that plan of Esther is perfectly and precisely relevant for us today. And this is what this Purim, 5786, 2026, this is what this Purim must mean for us. Vatomer Esther la'ashiv el Mordechai. Esther told her servant to go back to Mordechai and say the following. Lech kenosis kol haYehudim. Go and gather together all the Jews. The crumbling of our narrative can only be fixed, not by military might, not by political will, only by reestablishing the conviction, the truth of our narrative. And that can only happen if we heal our own divisions. Vayavor Mordechai vayas k'chol asher tzivsa olav Esther. Mordechai carried out everything that Esther told him. Esther came up with the plan. Mordechai carried it out. And Esther's plan succeeds as it unfolds. V'nahapachu. Everything turns upside down, such that not only the Jews, but even Achashverosh desert his own narrative and adopts the narrative of Mordechai and Esther, the narrative of Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel and Yoshua and the other prophets. We read, Vayomer HaMelech Achashverosh Vayomer Esther Malka, Mihu Zev Ezehu. Who is this person that would dare to hurt you? Vatomer Esther, and Esther says to Achashverosh, Ish Tzar V'Oyev Haman HaRasha. He's the one, Haman, his narrative. And the result was, Vayetlu es Haman alayitz. Haman was hung. He was killed. And the result of that was, Mordechai yatsa melevnei hamelech bilvush malchus. Mordechai left the presence of Achashverosh in garments of kingship. LaYehudim haisa ora v'simcha v'sasam bikar. We say this pasuk every week in Havdalah. And for the Jews, there was light, and there was joy, and there was gladness, and there was rejoicing. And we commemorate the holiday of Purim as a joyous day because our narrative was reestablished among Achashverosh, which is amazing, but most importantly, among our own people. And we rejoice. All right. So how do we celebrate Purim? Well, Mordechai and Esther tell us how to celebrate Purim. You all know this. La'sos osam yemei mishta v'simcha The day of Purim, it's the days because we observe Purim on Tuesday, and in Yerushalayim and Jerusalem, they observe Shushan Purim, they observe it on Wednesday, so there are 2 days when Purim could possibly be. Yemei Mishta v'Simcha, days of feasts and rejoicing. Now, that makes sense because now the Jews are rejoicing our narrative. The opposite of what happened at the beginning of the Megillah. At the beginning of the Megillah, they were rejoicing and at a feast that celebrated the alien narrative, which was the narrative of our destruction. But now we celebrate that our narrative is true and correct. Okay, so that makes sense. But the pasuk goes on, "Umishloach manos Yisraehu," and we send gifts of food, one person to their friend, "Umatanos levyonim," and we give gifts to those who are in need. Listen, those are very fine things. You should send gifts to your fellows, and you should give money to the poor who are in need. What's that got to do with Purim? Where in the entire story of Megillah, up until this verse, which is chapter 9, verse 22, where in the Megillah is there any mention of anything having to do with giving gifts of food to our friends and giving money to those who are in need? How does it relate to Purim at all? I'll tell you how it relates. It is the fulfillment in practical terms of what Esther said, Le kenosis kol Yehudim, gather together all the Jews. We've got to be gathered together. We have to show friendship to one another. We have to be close to one another. And if one of us is in need, every one of us has to come and help. And that is the only way that we can regain our narrative. Vatichtov Esther Amalka uMordechai HaYehudi es kol tokef. Esther and Mordechai wrote this story. They wrote the Book of Esther. And they sent it to the Jews throughout the kingdom of Achashverosh that they should celebrate the holiday of Purim every year for all generations. Umamar Esther kiyam divrei hapurim ha'ele v'nichtav b'sefer. And Esther's legislation validated these regulations for Purim, and it has become the practice of the Jewish people every single year. Mordechai and Esther wrote this book for us, for you and me now. February, it'll be March 2026, Adar 5786. When we find ourselves in precisely the same parallel predicament. And it is precisely the same solution that we need to this year. It's written for every year, for every generation, but especially for us this year. And what this Purim must mean for us is that we are right. We are just. We keep hope alive for the fulfillment and the promise of Jewish destiny, just as our narrative promises. And that is what we need to think about and commit to this Purim, 5786. Commit to our narrative. It's right, it's just, it's noble. And it is the destiny of the Jewish people. My friends, thank you very much. I wish you a beautiful evening, a great Shabbos, and a joyous Purim infused with the spirit of the absolute certainty of our narrative, just as Mordecai and Esther were able to reestablish that narrative among the entire Jewish people. May we be able to establish it among the entire Jewish people today. Have a great Shabbos.